everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course, I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. Now, we have reached December, which is the time when we are most inundated with holiday media in all forms, but there are a certain number of titles that I think of as really major holiday classics that kind of are at the forefront of people's minds. Features like the Rankin and Bass stop motion animated titles like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Jack Frost, The Year Without Christmas, and then there's that gorgeous British film and symphonic poem, The Snowman, where, there's no dialogue really. It's just, some gorgeous animation with the background of this symphony orchestra, and it's absolutely beautiful. And it manages to tell a story that can reach anyone, no matter what language you speak, no matter how old you are. It's just really, really absolutely gorgeous. And then there's of course the classic 1966 How the Grinch Stole Christmas. These are all titles, by the way, that are available on DVD or Blu-ray and or streaming with your library card. But thinking about these titles that kind of automatically come to mind as classics, it made me kind of wonder, what are people going to think of as classics in the next 10, 20, 30 or more years? Of course, there will always be these features, Charlie Brown Christmas, so many other animated titles. But what are some of the more contemporary films and specials that will manage to resonate with generations down the line? So I have decided to pick through some of my favorite animated Christmas features, and we are going to kick off our December with a trio of them that I think could very well end up on this venerated list. As always, these recommendations are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. And without any further ado, let's get to the recs. Okay, my first recommendation is available via our CleveNet service on DVD and Blu-ray, and that is 1993's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Now, I do think, in my mind, Nightmare Before Christmas is already kind of borderline classic. Most of the friends my age who have kids have introduced this film to them. It's one that I know I watch every single year, usually twice a year, once at Halloween and then once at Christmas. But at the same time, I do think tonally it is so different from so much of what we usually consider as classic holiday films that it's still a little bit borderline. Now, The Nightmare Before Christmas features some incredible stop motion animation, some of the best I've ever seen. And thematically, it's very much like a classic story along the lines of, say, It's a Wonderful Life, where the primary character sort of has a bit of an existential crisis and has to figure out who he is and the value in the life that he leads. It's just all told with a bit of a macabre window dressing, In Nightmare Before Christmas, we are following Jack Skellington, who is the Pumpkin King in Halloween Town. He is incredible at scaring people. He's, like, again, the Pumpkin King for a reason. He and all of his compatriots are the masters of macabre. They are great at, like, the dark. They are great at scaring people. They are Halloween. And for whatever reason, year after year, this sort of existence sort of weighs on Jack, and so we come to him at a moment of crisis where he no longer knows the value of this thing that he does. And Jack eventually discovers Christmas Town and sees all of these delightful things that are going on in that particular realm, and he decides to essentially steal Christmas. He can be Santa. He can be the best Santa, right? So he tries to redesign Halloween Town and himself as folk who would put together a a holiday season that Christmastown does. Um, of course, there are a lot of problems with that when you're dealing with a group of people who have a very specific mindset, and that's part of the fun of the story, is that like you're sort of learning that the things you know you're good at for a reason. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. But at the same time, it's quite charming. And of course, there's underneath all of this story of figuring out who you are, valuing what you have some unbelievably lovely music, like really lovely music. Um, and oftentimes these songs are so outside of the realm of your normal children's film. I mean, they're definitely songs that appeal to every generation, like What's This and things like that, but there's some really like quite deep soliloquy style thoughts going on in this film. So I think it really appeals to so many age ranges that it's hard not to feel that this is a classic, that this is something that you could watch with an entire family year after year after year. um Again, the big difference is really like the window dressing. You Halloween Town really is dark. There's some seriously deep dark themes going on in there, along with, just the color scheme as well. Halloween Town, it's all dark fall colors, browns, grays, dark oranges, things like that. And then of course you get to then you get to Christmas Town. Everything is bright and primary colored, and it's just a really really fascinating way that they've added to this story. Like the sets are as much a part of the storytelling factor as the words and the script and everything. And then of course you have phenomenal performances by all the voice acting. Chris Sarandon, who's probably most famous for playing Prince Humperdinck in The Princess Bride, he voices the speaking voice of Jack Skellington. Danny Elfman, who is hugely famous composer, especially when working with Tim Burton, he's the singing voice of Jack, and he composed all of the music. Catherine O'Hara from Christopher Guest's Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, A Mighty Wind. She plays Jack's love interest, Sally, who is a Frankenstein-esque monster. Monster is really relative because she definitely has she's one of the most heart-centric characters, which you could argue is something similar with with Frankenstein's monster, but I digress. You have a trio of uh, tiny terrors who sort of create mischief wherever they go. One of them is voiced by Paul Rubens, who was, of course, famous for his portrayal of Pee Wee Herman. You've got a lot of really fascinating voice actors in here, and they do such a good job. I mean, really, some of these animated characters are as vibrantly real as any live action character figure, and it works so well because you're dealing with this sort of animation that you can go kind of over the top without making it seem ridiculous. It really fits. You've got an incredibly well voiced villain in Oogie Boogie, but just in general, it's such a fun movie, and it really does play around with some very common holiday themes, but in a very different way and in a very accessible way and in a way that you don't get tired of seeing. I know I mentioned It's a Wonderful Life before, but this is sort of like that weird quirky cousin, and it's so effective in telling that story of discovering how to value the things that you have and the people that are around you. Anyway, if you are interested in an incredibly well animated film, because stop motion animation is an unbelievable craft in and of itself, but it is done to perfection in this. If you were looking for really, really excellent music, phenomenal acting, just a great story overall that will definitely appeal to both the young and the old in your household, make sure you add The Nightmare Before Christmas to your holiday viewing list. It is an absolute must-watch. Okay, my next recommendation is also available on DVD and Blu-ray via our CleveNet service, and that is 2011's Arthur Christmas. Now, when I was a child in the 80s, I was always super duper skeptical of the whole concept of Santa Claus. I would always ask questions about how is it possible to do these things to, manage to get to billions of households and go down chimneys, and it just, I had lots of questions. And I think today we have kids in a world where these questions are even more common, and one of the things that I love so much about Arthur Christmas is that within the first 10 minutes it is able to illustrate just how technology is able to aid Santa's cause. And it is such a fun little montage of present delivery. It's just delightful, absolutely delightful, and that's within the first 10 minutes of this film. But I digress. Let's back up a little bit. Basic storyline. We are in a world where everyone knows Santa, of course, delivers presents to children around the world. And what we don't know is that Santa is very much aided with some really incredible tech gear, as well as a very well-oiled machine of elf operatives. And that Santa is not just one person, but he's actually the foremost Santa of a generation after generation after generation of Santas. And when we meet the Santa Claus in this particular film, he is on his like 70th mission, and he's getting ready to pass on the mantle to his son Steve. Steve is very much in charge of the whole North Pole operation. He's at home base while Santa's out doing his thing. And then Santa's second son, Arthur, is very much still, while a part of the process, he's the one who's answering children's letters from to Santa. He's the one who really connects to all of these kids. He's not about necessarily like the day-to-day like hardcore operations system side, but he's about, the warm and fuzzy feelings. He essentially has Christmas in his heart the way that he has always imagined Santa would. When we meet all of these characters, the unthinkable happens and one gift is left behind. And the entire movie is sort of based around the idea of needing to get this one gift to the child who has essentially, whose wish has been left behind. And it asks a lot of questions. What is the value in one child's wish compared to the billions that have been answered? Like the 0.000 whatever percent of failure is that negligible, and that's a question that the Santas ask each other. And it's just a really clever way of, doing a Santa story, but also a coming of age story, a tale of generational love and affection, and passing along the mantle. We meet multiple generations of Santa here, and it's really, really fun to do. And they're all voiced by some fantastic, fantastic actors. You've got Arthur, who is voiced by James McAvoy. You have Steve, played by Hugh Laurie. And Steve, I've got to say, is one of my favorites simply because he's so not what anyone pictures as Santa. Jim Broadbent is your current Santa. He's Malcolm. He's definitely been Santa for a very long time and is probably should pass along the mantle, but is still kind of clinging to the job. And then you have the Santa of years gone by, voiced by Bill Nighy. And Bill Nighy is just so delightful in really everything he does, but especially in this. And it's just, I don't know, there's something about this one. It very much is one of those films that helps even those of us who I think are a bit more cynical about the holiday season to really feel like the warm, fuzzy moments. This film is incredibly heartfelt. It is incredibly optimistic, and it is lovely. It's also delightfully clever and funny. The dialogue is really ridiculous. It is an Aardman picture, and I think that's one of those common traits within Aardman films, is that sort of clever, quippy dialogue. You have a lot of very fast-paced conversations going on, and it runs on multiple tiers of understanding. You've got your base what you see is what you get, but then you've got all like the jokes and the subtext going on too. But it's a lot of fun, and it's just very, very well done. And I think it is a great way to sort of modernize the concept of Santa and like, how does this magic work? How does it happen? You know, like I said, as a child who was also very skeptical, I like the idea that this is a real kind of legit way to explain how, in a very technologically advanced world, this tech is not something that is, you know, necessarily anathema to the magic of the holiday season, but can actually aid and abet things within the holiday system. So yeah, if you are looking for a really delightfully warm, fuzzy Christmas tale that also really leans into the idea of Santa Claus and the magic of Christmas, make sure you check out Arthur Christmas. It is a lot of fun, and I definitely think it could end up on a lot of people's classic holiday tales in the future. Okay, final recommendation time. This one is also available on DVD and Blu-ray via our CleveNet service, and it may be a bit of a controversial pick, but I'm choosing 2018's The Grinch. Yes, okay, so when The Grinch originally came out, it was quite a polarizing film. So a lot of people went into it, I think, expecting not a shot-for-shot remake of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but something that was much more closely aligned. This is not that. There are tons of tonal shifts within this. You know, production-wise, looks very, very different. But at the heart of it, you still have the same story. You've got an isolated curmudgeon who has a beef with the Who's in Whoville. He takes it upon himself to essentially wreck their holiday season. But by the end of the film, and I don't, spoiler alert, by the end of the film, he has a change of heart. Basic storyline. And that is pretty much the basic storyline of the first. It's how we get to all of those parts. Like I mentioned, it was quite a polarizing picture at first, but I think as the years have gone by, people are watching it more with fresh eyes and are seeing it in a slightly different way. This is very much a Grinch story for a new generation. Really, really lovely, lovely animation. It's coloring wise, you know, stylistically, it's very new, and I can absolutely appreciate that. I think it looks lovely. But what I really find quite fun is the humor side of things. I do think that the translation of this humor, the transition of this humor works really, really well with this particular story. I mean, you have a who's voiced by Kenan Thompson, for heaven's sake. And this Who is probably my favorite Who in the whole story. He's ridiculous. He is the Christmas spirit, you know, and he of course gets on the Grinch's nerves, but that interplay is really vital to the storyline. It's an ongoing gag. So when you see how things change and how interactions shift, it's really quite lovely, to be honest. I mean, it's they manage to really, really show how the Grinch's arc is quite full. You know, you get those feelings from the 1966 version. I love the 1966 version, but I do also feel like this one has its own merits, and I do think that, you know, the voice acting really helps in that. Speaking of voice acting, when I first heard that Benedict Cumberbatch had been cast as the Grinch, I was like, well, that's some really weird stunt casting. Because, you know, he's not somebody that I thought would really do a great job with this particular role. But his take on it is quite interesting, and it's less get off my lawn than I think some of the earlier interpretations have been. You know, I've always, in my mind, the Grinch has always been sort of this very grizzled, older Who, and this Who is not that. He's got beef, but there's a reason, and you really, really dive into that too. And I think expanding that part of the character and seeing that fleshed out really does help give his Grinch motivation, and we really see how, even as a younger Grinch, I guess, why he would still be so angry and so bitter about the Who's. And he does a very serviceable job with it, I think. I especially love the interactions between his Grinch and Max. Max is just a phenomenal character. Max is his very loyal dog, as well as his interactions with Fred. Fred is a reindeer, and I'm not gonna like dive into it, but Fred is just delightful. Just delightful. Um, but really, like he's able to imbue these interactions with non-speaking characters with so much heart, with so much depth, that you're already starting to see a better picture of who the Grinch is. In a way that I do think we kind of miss out on, is from the book or from the original adaptation. I do think that this is a very decidedly modern take on that and spin on it. So as I said, purists may have a little bit of trouble with this. Totally get it, because it is so different. But I think if you go into this particular film and you don't attach it to its predecessor, if you don't feel like it has to be married to the same style, the same, overall presentation, I think you can see that there are some real merits to this one, and it is absolutely lovely, and there's some really iconic moments within it that I do think this generation, next generation, and potentially generations after that will definitely gravitate toward. So yeah, this one is also going to be on my list, and I definitely think it's worth checking out. Okay, so those were my recommendations for potential new holiday classic animated films. If you have any recommendations of your own, please comment with those below. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover in the future, definitely share those. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I love putting these lists together. This time of year is so much fun. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off of this episode. Again, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye.